Welcome back to Tabletop Assault. I'm Ross, and today I wanted to cover Codex supplements and campaign books. This mainly comes after the Book of Rust. Reason for this is the Book of Rust does a bit of an odd thing where it does have supplements in it, but also has formations, and it is for many factions. I think the Book of Rust is getting a bit of a bad rep because of this. While trying to cover a lot of factions, it seems to be only snippets, and paying an extra £20 or more for a few pages seems unsatisfactory. So I wanted to have a look on these sort of non-codex books, what makes them work, what parts didn't. Although supplements and campaign stuff are nothing new, the earliest I remember from playing was I think the Elder Craft World supplement. I do not know that book in detail as I never owned it, but I also remember the Eye of Terror campaign books, and for fantasy it was the Storm of Chaos, both excellent campaign books themselves. So there's a bit to cover, let's have a look into it. First up, we're going to have a look at Codex supplements, and I suppose we should actually start off with the purpose of a Codex. So Codex themselves have a lot to cover, but mainly it gives you a brief overview of a faction. Necrons, as an example, shows the faction's history as a whole, how their deals led to their downfall, their enslavement of a star god, and their eventual long sleep. The Space Marine Codex explains a lot of the history of the Imperium, who the Space Marines as a whole are, how they support the Imperium, and one of their darker times in the Horus Heresy. A Codex also has to cover a number of data sheets, stratagems, etc. to make the force work as a whole. This means there's very little pages left to break the factions down further without making a Codex an extremely large tome. This is where supplements can bridge this gap. So the purpose of a supplement is to expand on the individual forces within a codex. Supplements should take the base level of a codex and focus them, so fans can learn more of the individual forces that they play as. Though Dark Angels, Space Wolves, White Scars are extremely different forces who have different histories and different ways to wage war, they all come from the basis of Space Marines. This was explored in the individual Legion supplements, and I will speak on them later, but the same does exist through nearly every faction in the 40k universe. Having supplements allows you to explore the history of these factions in far more detail along with their deeds and mannerisms, learn more about the significant characters within these factions in more details, and then to advance gameplays in ways that fits this faction more specifically. So, what are examples of good Codex supplements? Now, a lot of these examples are going to be Marine heavy, after all, they have had the most supplements. Also, on a controversial note, let's start with the Marine supplements, start with them. Now, I will address negatives at some point, so do not need, harsh comments straight away. I will go into the good and bad, but let's start with the positive. It is a very detailed look into each legion. These books are an in-depth look into each legion, full of beautiful artwork, tales of tremendous victories and terrible losses. We see different heroes throughout the legions, and also a look at some of the successor chapters as well. In terms of lore, if you combine each of the Codex supplements, this includes Dark Angels and Space Wolves, etc., you'd be looking at nearly 600 pages roughly. I only have the Imperial Fist one at hand, but I think there's nearly 10 books, and the Imperial Fist one is 60 pages roughly, so you get the idea. Either way, these supplements in terms of detail and lore for each legion is very personal. Not only do many players have a favourite faction to play, they also have a favourite legion, or dynasty, or craft world, etc. These books may not be perfect, but for those who really like lore and artwork for a specific legion, I would say they were very good. Now, they also allow you to extend your playstyle focusing on this legion. In the Space Marine supplement, this ranged from characters, individual unit choices, rules for taking your whole legion, warlord traits, psychic abilities, relics, and stratagems. Now, I'll get to the point, this may be a bit of an unfair advantage later, but overall this enhances the feeling as playing as your legion, wanting to play to stand your ground, stoke and force a gunline, maybe Imperial Fists. Space Wolves, it's all about being able to get across the battlefield or stalk from the sides, preparing an ambush and decisive attacks. Iron Hands, well, we remember the painful time of them being very difficult to kill. However, this made each legion feel very individual. Now, I do not play Loyalist Space Marines, and I know in some editions they have had, this sense of individuality, but before 8th this had been something most armies dreamed of, even in the addition of regiments of Astrum Militarum or Seps for Tau. It made these forces feel very individual. These books though went a step further in terms of quality, and in a good way. However, there was some downsides. The cost of breaking these into individual books. Not counting the main Space Marine book, to get all the supplement books, all 10 I think, it costs roughly £170, don't know what that is in dollars. That's a lot for then the whole sort of rules for Space Marines, and not everyone actually wants the lore. I would say that everyone mainly kind of wants to get a complete rule set. I think it would be partly a mistake not to release a completed volume of just rules from the supplements at the end. I feel people may have bought one or two of the supplements of the legions that they loved, but a completed volume of rules allows them then to have more options, especially if people have a custom faction that allows them to jump around legions as successors. Don't know if that's a thing for many Marine players, but I have a Red Corsairs army that uses a variety of different Chaos Legion traits, which allows me to play the same army but in a variety of different ways. Either way, one or two supplement books and a collected volume of just the rules from all of them collected would be about £80 to £100 for those 3 books, which is not terrible I think, and you might even stick to just having the collected rules at the end of it, and it would save you a lot more money and have one book with the collected rules. I think that would be a very good step forward for these individual faction supplements. The other part is that it does create an unfair advantage. So this is not a negative for Space Marines, more for the other forces. But with all the additions listed, Legion bonuses, Warlord traits, stratagems, etc., this huge amount of extra resources arguably unbalances the game. Sure, Marines actually did not do particularly good through most of 8th edition, but when they got a new Codex and then these supplements in the last third of the edition, they completely reshook the meta. The Codex itself was solid, but adding the supplement on top of it as well with so many variants made competition difficult and a little unbalanced. So covering the good, a positive of the individual supplements focuses on one legion. Let's look at other ways you can do it, a bit more general when it comes to supplements. A complete collection of supplements. The old school Traitor Legion 1 is a great example of an extremely good supplement. It was a shame that it got one, I think, less than a year of use. I believe it came out in around December 2016. However, it was very good. It added the idea of Legion rules to many of the legions, this is for the Chaos side, such as Death Guard gaining Fearless, Feel No Pain and -1 initiative to all Vets of the Long War, bar Plague Marines and Typhus, who I think already had these rules, making the whole legion feel very similar. This worked excellently for Bikers for Death Guards. You could take them in 7th, unfortunately they disappeared in 8th, and they were extremely useful. I can remember a kill team match, this literally won me the match, but it started out making legions feel just individual. Even more so, there was formation rules for Chaos and their Decurion style formation. Do not ask, it was back in the past thing. Let's look at more recent stuff. The Psychic Awakening Faith and Fury. Sure, this had Marine stuff in it, but the Chaos stuff was where the gold was at. The advantages here, it added rules similar, though not completely, to the Marines, but a lot more limited. It added stratagems, warlord traits, relics to 6 of the 9 Traitor Legions. Death Guard and Thousand Sons had their own Codex and their own Psychic Awakening, and Black Legions got their update in Vigilus Ablaze. However, in this 67 pages, it does cover a lot of rules, even a name generator for the Legions as well. It may not have been as detailed as the Loyalist part, but it was all in one book. This had little lore in it, bar the actual Faith and Fury part, not actual Legion lore, but it just condensed all the rules into a book. Ultimately, having these rules in one volume means the cost is extensively less than a collective rules of Marines. The disadvantages of these collected ones should make sense of it being the opposite of Marines. The lack of lore really does show in this one. Now, Thousand Sons and Death Guard Codex do have a bunch of lore, and it's easy to just focus on the Horus Heresy, but certainly in the case of Magnus Mortaran, there have been very busy with their legions. You do not really have that access of detail for the other legions. In Faith and Fury alone, we hear from some of the traitor legions, but the one I'm interested in was the Wordbearers and Cor Ferron, a character from the Horus Heresy, and I would love to know more about that character and what they've been up to. The other is the rules are lacking. There is no take a complete Legion of Iron Warriors and get a bonus rule, and there's no individual psychic abilities. Makes sense for World Eaters, but less so for the others. The point in all this is that the examples seem polar opposite of another, have very individual books, rich in lore and rules for the Space Marines, versus a compressed amount which is affordable, which happened a lot when it came to the Chaos Space Marines. I truly believe there is a happy medium here possible, whether it is to have these individual books similar to the Marines, but I feel comprehensive rules at the end of the publishing would also be great as well. This would allow you to get your rich lore volumes on a faction you love, but also have a collected rule version for the entire force as well. This may be a bit more difficult to justify in factions that see less individual play, but even then the Imperial Fist rules can be fit into about 12 pages, I think. There's a possibility that entire factions could be fitted into one book, with expanded rules and a bit more lore and a bit more character to them, though I could be a little optimistic there. Though not a Codex supplement, I wanted to mention campaign books, as they were ways to introduce different ways to play and lore as well. My first encounter of this, and a personal favourite, was the Eye of Terror campaign. Don't ask me the year, I think it was about 2002, 2003 give or take, but this brought a variety of ways to play a different faction. Notably, Astra Militarum, then Imperial Guard, had the Cadian Shock Troopers, Chaos played the Lost and the Damned, Space Wolves had the 13th Company, and finally Elder had the Oathway Strike Force. In my case, I played the Lost and Damned, which allowed limited Chaos units, but had Traitor Guard units along with some zombies I used as well, though that might have been because Typhus's updated sort of model release. I forget the details. Either way, I had a huge amount of fun with the endless hordes and traitor vehicles. It was a very different way to play Chaos, and different to what a lot of other people were playing. On a more recent note, we can look at Vigilus Defiant. This was vastly different to how Vigilus Ablaze went. Vigilus Ablaze sort of concentrated primarily on Chaos Space Marines and notably Black Legion in a lot of ways. But Vigilus Ablaze, instead of focusing on one force, this had multiple, along with different war zones, which would present different ways to play. Mainly like you would pay command points to unlock, which you would get access to other warlord traits, relics and stratagems. In many of these cases you are mostly buying the specialist attachment to get access to these stratagems, but not always. Though this covered a number of factions: Space Marines, 6 different ones, AdMech, 2, Genestealer Cult, 2, Craft Worlds, 2, Astra Militarum, 5 and Orcs, 4. However, as most of these were only 2 stratagems and a few extra bits, I think they were rather limited and at a cost, which on a whole made it slightly unpopular. There were ones there that were great and used, but there were many there that were left behind as paying a cost simply made them undesirable. I think this is largely why we haven't seen them expanded on. I understand that specialist attachments, formations etc. should come with cost. Often this was the case where limited units could be used, which kinda applies in Vigilus Defiant, though it didn't limit you and the bonuses were limited. But along with this, the cost of command points, it just all felt like too much of a cost too high. I do not play Age of Sigmar, but I hear War Scrolls are very popular as a sort of formation option, and they involve actually just paying points, or so I'm told. This seems a bit more of a popular approach. So this is where I kind of get to the point to all this, and it comes to us in the campaign book, our latest one, the Book of Rust. In a lot of ways this has proved unpopular, and I'll go into why I think this is. But also I do believe Games Workshop is trying to satisfy its vision for pushing the narrative forward, where in the past it did not do so. In the past couple of years, or say the last 5 years or so, it has pushed forward quite a lot. And by involving as many factions as possible, not just their favourite in terms of the Loyalist Marines, who rule-wise do not appear, Then again, let's not deny, when it comes to 9th edition, the Loyalist Marines have had a lot of rules recently. But what I'm going to do is explain sort of the positives and negatives, probably mostly the negatives, of the Book of Rust. So there's 8 pages of supplements covering 3 different armies. That to me is not necessarily good. Very, very limited amount. Now the actual rules parts of the supplements is not bad. They are very condensed, roughly offering 3 warlord traits, 4 relics and a number of stratagems, I think 8 each. Now this is not necessarily bad, none of them have any psychic abilities as such, though, so the quality is not too bad. However, the danger I can see here is that you may push certain factions to go specific forge worlds, houses or cults for the sheer fact they have more resources. Not always, but it seems a bit unbalancing. The other danger here, and I think the main one, is if they bring out more supplements for these factions in other books, meaning sort of take Drakari at the moment being one of the most modern codexes. They have one supplement in the Book of Rust, but there could be another supplement in another book, and another. This worries me slightly, and although it can be foolish to speculate about such things, eventually if they spread supplements or even armies of renown out so much, we could be buying many books for only a few pages of rules at a time. And without the concentrated lore of certain legions, forge worlds, etc., I see this as a little bit dangerous, but only because it gives a slight imbalance for other factions, and a danger to balance in terms of require a lot of books, and that's also a requirement of a significant cost. Army of Renown, also kinda like Formation, all but in name. I largely like the idea of it, however making it army wide not in a detachment may feel a little bit restrictive. Sure, I suppose if you made it into a detachment it may actually be closer to a supplement. However, I think this will be slightly tricky to pull off. Having an army wide restraint means that key units may not be able to be used and making it incredibly difficult to play as. But then again, it may ask you to just change up the ways you play. Taking an example, the Terminus Est Assault Force, it restricts you from Mortarion and vehicles, which is a huge ask for Death Guard, but you're rewarded with extra resources and especially their Outbreak Assault. I think this Army of Renown actually does work best when used in a narrative book, such as the Book of Rust. Heck, it even reminds me of the Eye of Terror campaign, taking elements of an army and then giving them a different way to be played. They're entirely different ways to try your army, not additions to how you actually play them in general. That is what a supplement should be. So in this regard, having themed armies like this sort of works well within a campaign book. So there we have it on my discussion of supplements and campaign books. I suppose if I am to conclude it, is that supplements should be an extension of your codex, and what I mean by that is that it should offer you additional rules that are more specific to the ways you want to play, especially if there's an element in narrative that you enjoy, such as Space Wolves, Dark Angels, or even into the Cabals for Drakari, or even into the Dynasty of Necrons. These supplements should focus in on them, explore their lore, and make ways for you to play a bit more individual to them. While a campaign book should explore the lore and push it forward, but maybe take these armies and really reshuffle them in very different ways. I like the Army of Renown, it gives them such different variety, but having elements of supplements in them I don't think works well, because this could require you, rather than having this condensed way of looking at your faction, you may not end up with as much pages as you'd like, and it feels a little bit less of what a supplement could do. So the separation of these two is very, very essential, and then the strengths and benefits of both are essential. We've got in terms of supplements, where you could have your Space Marines, where you have a book completely dedicated to one. That may be a bit costly to buy the whole collection. Or say you look at Traitor Legions, where you may not get as much love and lore and everything when it comes to individual legions, but you do get all of them covered in one book and they are cost effective. So you can see many sort of advantages and disadvantages to them. This can be both in play, but it also can be in cost to the customer. So I'm very interested to hear what people have to think on supplements and campaign books. Do you like them? Do you not? Do you think what elements of them work well? What elements do not? Please let me know in the comments. I'm very interested to speak to you guys. So thanks again Hope you enjoyed. Check us out on social media where you can see our upcoming projects we're working on, and check us out on our Tabletop Assault Battle Report.